Fortune's Formula, the untold story of the scientific betting system that beat the casinos in Wall Street, by William Poundstone. Picture this. It's June 20th, 1947, late evening in Beverly Hills. A man sits in his luxurious mansion, casually flipping through the newspaper. His name is Benjamin Siegel, though most people know him as Bugsy, a nickname he absolutely despises. He's a gangster, sure, but also a dreamer who's just built the Flamingo Hotel and Casino right in the middle of nowhere, in a desert town called Las Vegas. At this moment, he thinks he's untouchable. Outside, hidden in the shadows, another man raises a military carbine. He steadies his aim through the window and empties the clip. Most of the bullets miss, but 4 don't. One strikes Siegel's head with such devastating force that his right eyeball is literally blown from its socket, landing 15 feet away on the dining room floor. Here's the eerie part. Just 30 minutes before this execution, a group of intimidating men walks into the Flamingo's lobby in Las Vegas. They approach the manager with an unsettling calmness and simply say, "We're taking over now." So why did Bugsy Siegel end up with his eye on the dining room floor? It wasn't really about money or power, or even about his fancy casino. It was about something far more precious in the underworld, something that connected gangsters and Wall Street titans in ways most people never imagined. It was about information. You see, Siegel had been running his own private wire service, a sophisticated network that delivered horse race results to bookies across America within seconds of the horses crossing the finish line. In those days, before instant media was everywhere, this was like having a license to print money. Bookies could know who won a race before their customers did, which meant they could refuse bets on winners and eagerly accept bets on losers. The National Crime Syndicate, known ominously as the Combination, wanted control of this gold mine. Siegel said no, and that decision cost him everything. But Bugsy's story is just the opening act of something much bigger and stranger. This is really the story of a secret formula, discovered not by criminals in back alleys, but by quirky, brilliant scientists working in quiet laboratories. These were people who looked at the chaotic world and saw patterns, who understood that the same mathematical principles governing how information flows through a telephone wire could govern how money flows into your bank account. Today I'm going to take you through that story. We're going to uncover a scientific betting system that's been called Fortune's Formula. By the time we're done, you'll understand the hidden thread connecting a dice roll, a card flip, and the wild swings of the stock market. You'll discover the secret that allowed a handful of genius minds to beat casinos, dominate Wall Street, and build fortunes not through luck, but through a profound understanding of risk, information, and the most powerful wealth-building equation ever created. Our journey starts in a world that feels completely alien to a sterile science lab. We're talking about the gritty, smoke-choked early 20th century, where information moved at the speed of telegraph wires clicking away in dim offices. Back then, being a few minutes ahead of everyone else could mean the difference between striking it rich and losing your shirt. This was the era of the wire service, a business model that was simple, brilliant, and often violent. A telegraph operator named John Payne had a revelation. Bookies would pay huge money for instant race results, so he created a system. He'd station someone at the racetrack with a hand mirror, who'd flash the winner in code to an accomplice in a nearby tall building, who'd then telegraph the results across the city. Why was this worth so much? Because knowledge is power. If someone walked into a bookie's office wanting to bet on a horse that had already won, the bookie would simply refuse. But if someone wanted to bet on a horse that had already lost, well, the bookie would practically roll out the red carpet for that sucker. This became a money-printing machine, and it didn't take long for dangerous people to notice. People like Montens, a brutal Chicago gangster who seized control of the Illinois wire service. He demanded that bookies hand over half their daily profits. When competitors tried to muscle in on his territory, buildings started exploding. This wasn't a business for anyone with a weak stomach. The wire service evolved into a nationwide empire, a sprawling trust that stretched coast to coast, changing hands from gangster to gangster, from Monten to Mo Annenberg, and finally to the national crime syndicate, the combination. This world was filled with price wars, sabotage, and deliberately delayed race results designed to bankrupt rival bookies. The battle for control of this information network was so vicious that it led directly to mob executions, like the one that ended Bugsy Siegel's life in that Beverly Hills mansion. What all these gangsters instinctively understood was a fundamental truth about the universe. A private wire, a stream of information nobody else possesses, is the ultimate weapon. It transforms gambling into a sure thing. But this world of shadowy deals and brutal power plays was about to be completely disrupted. The wire service's success eventually caught the attention of the United States government. In the 1950s, Senator Estes Kefauver launched a series of televised hearings investigating organized crime. These hearings became a national obsession. Americans crowded around their new television sets, mesmerized as powerful mobsters were forced to testify. They watched men like Frank Costello, a major gambling kingpin, who famously told the senator that the only way to stop gambling was to, quote, burn the stables and shoot the horses. The Kefauver hearings pulled back the curtain on the mob's secret machinery and its dependence on the wire service. Public sentiment turned sharply against gambling, and Congress passed laws that effectively destroyed the gangsters' wire service empire. The age of hand mirrors, telegraph wires, and back-alley bookies was dying. But here's the twist. The story of the private wire wasn't over. It was about to be reborn in the most unexpected place imaginable. Just a few miles from the New Jersey mansion where one of America's most powerful mob bosses lived, another kind of empire was rising. This was Bell Labs, a think tank funded by the massive wealth of American telephone and telegraph AT&T. Bell Labs wasn't really a corporate office. It was more like a university for geniuses, where the brightest minds were given virtually unlimited resources and freedom to explore the cutting edge of science. And at the heart of this world was a man named Claude Shannon. If you've ever used a computer, sent a text message, or streamed a video, you're living in a world that Claude Shannon helped create. He was quiet, shy, and deeply playful, and he had almost single-handedly invented the science of information theory. He was the first person to propose that all information, whether words, pictures, or sounds, could be reduced to a simple binary code of zeros and ones. He called the basic unit of this code a bit. It was a revolution that would eventually give birth to our entire digital age. People at Bell Labs compared Shannon's brilliance to Einstein's, but Shannon was a different breed of genius. He was restless, constantly jumping from one obsession to another, leaving behind a trail of brilliant but often incomplete projects. He saw the world as one giant collection of fascinating puzzles. He built a robotic mouse that could solve mazes, machines that could play chess, and even a trumpet that shot flames. He was legendary for riding his unicycle down Bell Labs hallways while juggling. Despite all his genius, Shannon didn't publish much after his groundbreaking work in the 1940s. He preferred tinkering with his inventions and pursuing his passions, which he once listed as, quote, chess, unicycles, juggling, the stock market. It was this restless curiosity that led him to think about the very company that employed him. Shannon knew that AT&T had a complicated relationship with gambling. The company leased its telephone and telegraph lines to mob-run wire services, making a fortune from the very business it publicly condemned. This contradiction fascinated him. He saw a deep connection between the noise that can garble a telephone message and the uncertainty in a bet. A message with lots of noise is difficult to understand. A bet with lots of uncertainty is difficult to win. But what if you could cut through the noise? What if you had an edge? This same question obsessed another brilliant scientist at Bell Labs, a handsome Texan named John Kelly Jr. Kelly was fascinated by a hugely popular television quiz show called The $64,000 Question. It was a double-or-nothing game where contestants could risk everything they'd won for a shot at an even bigger prize. The show was a sensation, and some people were even placing bets on which contestants would win. Kelly heard about a scam where a gambler on the West Coast was getting the live East Coast show results over the phone, just before the delayed West Coast broadcast aired. The gambler was betting on a sure thing. This was essentially a private wire all over again. Kelly had a flash of insight. He realized that Claude Shannon's information theory could be applied directly to this problem. Shannon had developed equations to measure the rate at which information could flow through a noisy channel. Kelly theorized that this same mathematics could determine the optimal rate at which a gambler should grow their money. He imagined a gambler with a private wire receiving tips on horse races. The tips aren't perfect, sometimes they're wrong. So what should the gambler do? If he bets his entire bankroll on every tip, he'll eventually lose everything when a tip fails. But if he bets too conservatively, he's wasting his incredible advantage. Kelly asked, what's the perfect amount to bet? How can a gambler make the most money as quickly as possible without going broke? In 1956, he published a paper that answered this question. Buried in a technical journal under the incredibly boring title, A New Interpretation of Information Rate, was a formula of explosive power. This was the birth of what we now call the Kelly Criterion, or Fortune's formula. The formula itself is beautifully elegant. It says the fraction of your bankroll you should bet equals your edge divided by the odds. Your edge is your advantage, the difference between your true probability of winning and the odds you're being offered. If you have no edge, the formula tells you to bet zero. Don't play. But if you do have an edge, the formula gives you the exact percentage of your capital to risk on that single bet to maximize your long-term growth. This was revolutionary. Most betting systems, like the famous martingale system where you double your bet after every loss, are guaranteed paths to bankruptcy. They're fool's gold. The Kelly Criterion was different. It was a mathematical guarantee, promising the fastest possible wealth growth over time, with virtually zero risk of losing your entire bankroll. Why? Because it's a proportional system. You always bet a fraction of your current bankroll. If you hit a losing streak, your bets automatically get smaller and smaller, protecting you from ruin. When you're winning, your bets grow larger, compounding your wealth exponentially. Kelly's most profound insight was an equation as elegant as Einstein's E equals mc squared. He showed that the maximum possible growth rate of your money equals the rate of information you receive from your private wire. Think about the implications. Information equals money. A stream of bits could be converted directly into a stream of dollars. A single bit of information, if it was a sure thing about an even money bet, was worth a 100% return. Kelly even hinted that his formula wasn't just for gamblers. It could apply to certain other economic situations, specifically the stock market. After all, what is investing if not a sophisticated form of gambling? The only difference, as one of Kelly's colleagues put it, is a minus sign. Favorable bets are called investments. Unfavorable bets are called gambling. The formula was born, a perfect, powerful tool for turning an informational edge into a fortune. But it was still just theory, hidden in a scientific paper. It needed someone to take it out of the laboratory and into the real world. It needed someone with the courage to test it against the casinos and Wall Street. That person was a young, brilliant, and incredibly precise mathematics instructor at MIT named Edward Thorp. Thorp was a prodigy from childhood. By age 5, he could recite England's kings and queens in order. As a boy, he made money by betting a grocer he could calculate a customer's bill in his head faster than the grocer could with an adding machine. He had a restless, analytical mind, constantly searching for an edge, whether building homemade explosives as a kid or figuring out how to manipulate slot machines to make them pay out. In the late 1950s, Thorp came across a research paper analyzing the game of blackjack. Using army calculators, a team of mathematicians had devised an optimal strategy for playing. Their shocking conclusion was that with this strategy, the casino's edge was tiny, just 0.62%. This meant you could play all day making $1,000 bets and expect to lose only about $6 on average. Thorp was intrigued. He took the strategy to Las Vegas on a Christmas trip with his wife. He sat down at a blackjack table and, consulting a small card with the strategy written on it, began to play. The other players laughed at him. He lost a little money, but he noticed the mockers were losing even faster. Back at MIT, Thorp couldn't get the game out of his head. He realized the original study had a critical flaw. It assumed every hand was independent. But they weren't. The cards already played affect the probabilities of the remaining cards in the deck. For example, if you see lots of aces, which are great for players, come out in one hand, you know there are fewer aces left for the next hand. This was the key. By tracking the cards, a player could know when the deck was hot, rich in high cards like tens and aces, and when it was cold. When the deck was hot, the player had an edge over the house. Using MIT's powerful IBM 704 computer, Thorp ran millions of simulations. He developed a system for counting cards, specifically tracking the ratio of high cards to low cards. When the count was high, he knew he had an advantage. That's when he should bet big. Thorp now had a system he believed could beat the casinos. He wrote up his findings in a paper and needed a member of the prestigious National Academy of Sciences to submit it for him. The only mathematician at MIT who was a member was the legendary Claude Shannon. In November 1960, a nervous Ed Thorp walked into Shannon's office. He quickly explained his blackjack system. Shannon, the master of information and signals, was captivated. He instantly saw its brilliance. He not only agreed to submit the paper, but asked Thorp an intriguing question. "Are you working on anything else in the gambling area?" Thorp hesitated, then told Shannon about his old fantasy, building a wearable computer to predict where the roulette ball would land. Shannon's eyes lit up. This was a gadget to be built, a real-world puzzle to solve. The two geniuses agreed to collaborate, meeting in Shannon's basement workshop, a wonderland of strange machines, electronics, and half-finished inventions, to build the world's first wearable computer. But first, Thorp had to deal with the fallout from his blackjack paper. The Associated Press picked up the story, and suddenly gamblers from across the country were calling him, wanting to buy his system, finance him, or learn his secrets. It was Claude Shannon who gave Thorp the final piece of the puzzle. He told him about John Kelly's paper. Thorp read it and realized it was the missing link. Card counting gave him the edge. The Kelly Criterion told him exactly how much to bet when he had that edge. Among the many offers Thorp received, one stood out. It was from a syndicate of two wealthy New Yorkers, offering a $100,000 bankroll to take on the Nevada casinos. Thorp made the call and arranged to meet a man named Emanuel Kimmel, known as Manny. One Sunday, a midnight blue Cadillac pulled up to Thorp's modest Cambridge apartment. Out stepped two stunning blonde women in mink coats, followed by a small, gnome-like elderly man in a long cashmere coat. This was Manny Kimmel, a bookie, a proposition man, and a lifelong associate of some of America's most famous gangsters. He'd gotten his start in the rackets with the notorious Abner Zwillman, known as Longy, the New Jersey Al Capone. Kimmel was the living embodiment of the old world wire service, a man who'd fixed horse races and knew every trick in the book. He was skeptical but intrigued by this young math professor. After a few test sessions where Thorp consistently won, Kimmel was convinced. He and his partner, a tough, charismatic trucking executive named Eddie Hand, agreed to back Thorp. The deal was set. They'd provide a $10,000 bankroll, and Thorp would get 10% of the profits. Kimmel, the old-school gambler, would also be there to spot any cheating dealers. In the spring of 1961, Thorp, Kimmel, and Hand flew to Reno to put the system to the test. The experiment was a wild success. Thorp, using his 10-count system and applying the Kelly Criterion to his betting, began winning immediately. They moved from casino to casino, and the money piled up. But the casinos fought back. They weren't used to losing. At Harold's Club, the owner, Harold Smith Sr., came down to the table personally. He'd heard about card counters and ordered the dealer to start shuffling the deck early, destroying Thorp's advantage. At another casino, they brought in a knockout dealer, a woman who was an expert card sharp. Thorp and Hand watched her closely and caught her second dealing the second card from the deck instead of the top one to give herself a winning hand. When they called her out, the pit boss simply said it was their word against hers. Soon, Thorp's face was known all over town. He was barred from one casino after another. The casinos were terrified. They didn't understand how he was doing it, but they knew he was winning too consistently for it to be luck. They thought he had a photographic memory, or maybe even supernatural vision, that allowed him to see tiny defects on card backs. In just 30 hours of play, they'd turned the $10,000 bankroll into $21,000. The experiment was over. It was an undeniable success. Fortune's formula had beaten the casinos. Now Thorp turned his attention to an even bigger casino, Wall Street. Just like in blackjack, Thorp believed the stock market wasn't perfectly efficient. There were moments, he suspected, when assets were mispriced, creating opportunities for those who knew where to look. He started studying a type of security called a warrant, basically a long-term option to buy a stock at a set price. He realized the market often priced these warrants incorrectly. Using mathematical models based on the random walk theory of stock prices, Thorp could calculate the fair price of a warrant. When he found an overpriced warrant, he'd sell it short. When he found an underpriced one, he'd buy it. But he didn't stop there. To eliminate risk, he used a technique now known as delta hedging. He'd simultaneously take an opposing position in the company's actual stock. For example, if he sold an overpriced warrant short, he'd buy a specific amount of the underlying stock. This created a balanced, quote, market-neutral position. No matter if the stock went up or down, his combined position was protected. He was no longer betting on the market's direction. He was betting on the mispricing correcting itself over time. This was pure arbitrage, and it was incredibly profitable. Thorp began investing his own money, and soon his blackjack winnings and book royalties were compounding at an incredible rate. He was making returns of over 30% per year. In 1969, a young, ambitious stockbroker named James Regan, known as Jay, who'd read Thorp's new book, Beat the Market, contacted him. Regan wanted to start a new kind of investment partnership, a hedge fund. Based on Thorp's scientific methods, they were a perfect match. Thorp, the quiet intellectual, would develop theories and run models from his California office. Regan, the extroverted promoter, would handle the business side, raise capital, and work the phones in Princeton, New Jersey. They called their firm Princeton Newport Partners. It was an immediate and spectacular success. For 19 years, from 1969 to 1988, the fund delivered an average annual return of 15.1% after their hefty fees. The S&P 500, by comparison, averaged only 8.8% over the same period. Even more impressively, their returns were incredibly steady. The fund never had a down year. It never even had a down quarter. When the market crashed on Black Monday in 1987, losing 23% of its value in a single day, Princeton Newport was virtually unscathed. Thorp's market-neutral strategies had made the fund immune to the madness of the crowd. They were living proof that the market wasn't perfectly efficient and that with the right formula you could beat it consistently. But as Princeton Newport was proving the power of scientific risk management, another story was unfolding on Wall Street, a story that would serve as a dark and cautionary tale. In the early 1990s, a new hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management, known as LTCM, was born. It was founded by John Merriweather, a legendary bond trader from Salomon Brothers. But what made LTCM truly special was its all-star team of academics. It included Robert C. Merton and Myron Scholes, two brilliant economists who would go on to win the Nobel Prize for their work on options pricing. They were, by all accounts, the smartest guys in the room. LTCM pursued strategies similar to Princeton Newport's, looking for tiny mispricings in the global bond markets and using leverage to magnify those small profits into huge returns. And for a while, it worked like magic. The fund posted incredible returns of over 40% in its first few years. Investors were literally begging to get in. But there was a fatal flaw in their model. Thorp had heard whispers that Merriweather was a martingale man, a gambler who, when losing, would double down, betting more and more in hopes of winning it all back. LTCM used staggering amounts of leverage, sometimes borrowing 30, 50, or even 100 times their capital. They were making a massive bet that the financial world would continue behaving according to their elegant mathematical models. They were vacuuming up nickels, as Scholes liked to say, but they were doing it in front of a steamroller. In 1998, the steamroller arrived. Russia defaulted on its government bonds, sending a shockwave through the global financial system. Markets that were supposed to be uncorrelated all moved in the same direction, against LTCM. Their diversification failed. Their models broke. The fund began hemorrhaging money, losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day. In a matter of weeks, long-term capital management, the fund run by geniuses, lost $4.4 billion and was on the brink of collapse. The firm had become so large and so interconnected with every major bank on Wall Street that the Federal Reserve feared its failure could trigger a global financial meltdown. In an unprecedented move, the Fed orchestrated a massive $3.6 billion bailout by a consortium of Wall Street banks to prevent catastrophe. The dream team had blown up. Why? They had overbet. They'd ignored the most fundamental lesson of the Kelly Criterion. They were so confident in their edge that they took on an insane amount of risk. They'd forgotten that even the most unlikely events, the quote-quote tails of the probability curve, must eventually occur. They had a survival motive of zero. The story of LTCM is the perfect counterpoint to the story of Ed Thorp and Princeton Newport. Both were run by brilliant minds using mathematical models to exploit market inefficiencies. But only one understood the true essence of Fortune's formula. It's not just about maximizing returns. It's about managing risk to ensure you can stay in the game long enough for your edge to play out. It's about survival. So what's the ultimate lesson of Fortune's formula? At first glance, it seems like a story about a secret recipe for getting rich, a magical equation that can turn a small stake into a fortune. And in a way, it is. But the true wisdom of this book goes much deeper than that. The Kelly Criterion isn't just a betting formula, it's a philosophy for dealing with an uncertain world. It teaches us that the key to success, whether in a casino, the stock market, or in life itself, isn't about finding sure things. There are no sure things. It's about finding an edge, an advantage however small, and then managing your risks so you can exploit that edge over and over again for the long run. Claude Shannon showed us that information is the currency of the universe. It's the reduction of uncertainty. John Kelly translated that idea into the language of money. He showed that having better information than everyone else is the ultimate edge, and his formula provides a rational way to convert that edge into wealth. Ed Thorp then took that formula and proved, in the real world, that it worked. He demonstrated that even in arenas designed to be unbeatable, like casinos, or in markets thought to be perfectly efficient, like Wall Street, inefficiencies exist. There are always opportunities for those who are smart enough, disciplined enough, and patient enough to find them. But the most powerful lesson, the one that truly separates the winners from the losers in this story, is the one the geniuses at long-term capital management tragically forgot. It's the lesson of humility. The world is far more random and unpredictable than our elegant models would have us believe. Black swan events, the fat tails that defy our predictions, aren't just statistical curiosities. They're an inevitable part of reality. The Kelly Criterion, at its core, has what one writer called an airtight survival motive. It forces you to be disciplined. It holds you back from the brink of ruin by reminding you that no matter how good your edge is, you should never bet the farm. Because if there's even the tiniest chance of going broke, in the long run, you will. So how can you apply this profound wisdom to your own life? You don't need to be a card counter or a hedge fund manager? First, learn to think in probabilities. The world isn't black and white. It's a vast spectrum of grays. Instead of thinking, this will happen, or this won't happen, try thinking in terms of, what are the chances? This simple shift in mindset forces you to confront uncertainty in a more rational and clear-eyed way. Second, always ask yourself, what is my edge? In any decision you make, whether choosing a career, starting a project, or making an investment, what do you know that others don't? What unique skill, insight, or piece of information gives you an advantage? If you can't identify an edge, the formula is clear. Don't play. Or at the very least, don't bet big. And finally, respect the power of compounding and the danger of ruin. The path to wealth isn't a sprint. It's a marathon. It's about making good bets over and over and letting the power of compounding do the heavy lifting. But you can only do that if you stay in the game. Avoid any risk, no matter how small, that could take you out of the game completely. Protect your downside, and the upside will take care of itself. That was a summary of Fortune's Formula by William Poundstone. We've journeyed through the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the major cities and the rivers, but it can't convey the feeling of the sun on your skin or the sound of the local music. The real magic happens when you explore it for yourself. If the stories of these brilliant, daring minds and their quest for a perfect formula have sparked something in you, I encourage you to grab a copy of the book. Reading it isn't just about learning a system. It's about absorbing a new way of thinking that can genuinely change how you approach every decision you make. A link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to click that subscribe button. It tells us that these deep dives matter to you, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.